Hey guys, how's it going? We have covered a number of ancient servants in this series, some spanning ages of a few thousand years, but today we are going back to the beginning, back to the start of human civilization, to take a look at one of the original heroes of myth. Technically speaking, this is the fourth oldest servant that we have covered on this series, behind only Wandjina, Tiamat, and Ishtar, in order of oldest to youngest. Today, we are talking about everyone's favorite clay lad, Enkidu, and the myth of the world's first wild man. So, before we get into Enkidu, we need to talk about his rival turned friend, the golden boy with a personality of copper, Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a pretty complex figure in myth, being a demigod who severed the ties of divinity between the gods and humans, but then went on to rule over Mesopotamia with an iron fist. He mistreated his subjects so much that the gods answered the prayers of the people of Uruk to send down vengeance upon him. This vengeance came in the form of Enkidu, created by the goddess Aruru. In appearance, he was incredibly hairy and feral looking, but retained the basic traits of a human. In some tellings of the story, to exacerbate his wild nature, he is given bovine traits, usually a bull's horns, tail, ears, and legs. Aruru formed him from clay from the steppes and then led him free into the wild. Here, Enkidu ingratiated himself with nature, roaming with the packs of wild creatures, drinking from the streams, and sleeping openly in the grass. His existence wouldn't be discovered until a hunter caught sight of him destroying the traps that he had laid out and reported it back to his father. The news soon made its way to Uruk that an unknown monstrous man was roaming the outskirts of Babylon. Gilgamesh makes the decision to send one of his sacred prostitutes, Shamat, to deal with the beast man. Now, that's probably an oxymoron for a lot of people, the term sacred prostitute. To put it very briefly, sacred prostitution was a practice in which intercourse was sold, though the money often went to the temple and sacred prostitutes often worshipped a fertility deity, and so sex was likely seen as a sacred act of service to their god. For instance, many sacred prostitutes of Uruk were likely followers of Ishtar, the patron deity of the city who was a goddess of sex. Shamat found Enkidu and over the course of just 2 weeks was able to educate him and make him human, gaining the ability to speak and think intelligently. The trade-off, though, is that by gaining humanity, he lost his place in nature, and now the beasts he once frolicked with ran from his presence. With nowhere to go, Shamat, still a citizen who had suffered under Gilgamesh despite her position, and possibly understanding the will of the gods, convinces Enkidu to accompany her back to Uruk to fight Gilgamesh. On the journey back, Enkidu speaks with and learns from shepherds the crimes of Gilgamesh against the people. He drinks with these shepherds and then defends them from wolves and beasts of the night until they make it back to Uruk. Once there, Enkidu sees Gilgamesh dragging off the wife of a newly married couple so that he could take her first time. Enkidu steps in the way of Gilgamesh and the two have an awe-inspiring fight. The battle is brutal, with each pushing the other to the brink until finally they both collapse in exhaustion. From this fight, they earned each other's respect and a bond of friendship grew between them. Here, Enkidu seemed to help Gilgamesh mellow out a bit. The bond between the two soon grew deep enough that Enkidu was willing to share his troubles and thoughts with the king. He told Gilgamesh that the transition from a beast to a man has left him longing for his old life. Enkidu tells Gilgamesh that he misses the time he spent in the forest and among the animals. To this, Gilgamesh proposes that they go on an expedition to the Cedar forest, a sacred area guarded by a monstrous guardian named Humbaba. In doing so, they can go out and touch grass and kill a troublesome monster. A win-win. But Enkidu warns Gilgamesh of the dangers of the area, having been there before his humanization. The citizens of Uruk, seeing that their king is willing to remove what is functionally a roadblock to a massive resource, namely the cedar wood, think the plan is great. However, the elders of Uruk believe that it will have dire consequences due to the sacred nature of the forest, and what killing its guardian may entail. Gilgamesh, ever one to do as he sees fit, begins the expedition on his own, while Enkidu is advised by the elders to assist Gilgamesh in any way that he can and protect him, to which Enkidu agrees. As they make their journey, the mother of Gilgamesh, the goddess Ninsun, proclaims that she has adopted Enkidu as her son and requests the sun god Shamash to watch and protect both of them on their upcoming journey. To get to the cedar forest, the pair must pass through various mountains, at each of which they perform a sacred rite in hopes of safe travels. These rites are answered in the forms of dreams of natural disasters such as landslides. Though Gilgamesh is shaken by these dreams, Enkidu is instead encouraged by them. Finally, they reach the cedar forest. Venturing inside, they are met with a horrible yell that freezes both men. The thunderous scream is met by an equally thunderous monster who appears on the path, Humbaba. The fate interpretation of Humbaba is actually pretty interesting. Humbaba is theorized to be a representation of a massive calamities, hence the terrible dreams mentioned earlier. As such, Fate's Humbaba has no definitive form, but rather appears as an amalgamation of calamities in the time period in which she is summoned. And yes, Fate's Humbaba, at least to my knowledge, is a she. The historical Humbaba, however, more closely appears to be a traditional giant or ogre with a hideous face, monstrous physique, and incredible strength. Faced against such a hellish creature, the ever-proud Gilgamesh cowered in sheer horror. Had it not been for Enkidu's encouragement to fight, this is likely where Gilgamesh would have died. Humbaba, upon seeing who the trespassers are, immediately accuses Enkidu of betraying the natural order, and then threatens to rip out Gilgamesh's guts so that the birds may feast on them. Thus, the fight begins. The first strike comes from Gilgamesh, the power of which splits a mountain in two, and as the battle rages on, the sun god makes good on his promise and binds Humbaba so that he is helpless against the pair. In an act of desperation, he pleads with Gilgamesh to spare his life, offering to become his slave to work as a woodcutter in the sacred forest. Gilgamesh surprisingly pities the monster, but Enkidu steps in and remarks that killing such a fearsome foe will serve his reputation better. Gilgamesh relents, and in his dying breath, Humbaba curses the pair that Enkidu will die before Gilgamesh. With this, Enkidu and Gilgamesh cut the largest cedar in the forest with the plans to make it a gate for the god Enlil, and return victorious to Uruk with the head of Humbaba. Returning in success with new exploits under their belts, the king of Uruk catches the eyes of the goddess Ishtar. Impressed by his achievements and wishing for him to be her husband, she attempts to seduce the king with offers of immense power and wealth. Given that he is the king of the largest civilization of humanity at the time, has mellowed out thanks to the influence of Enkidu, and has an inherent distrust of the divine, Gilgamesh rejects her proposal. Further, he remarks to her that every man that she has been with ends up dead, or worse, after she grows tired of them, and that he has no plans of being added to that list. Enraged and embarrassed, Ishtar runs back to her father and demands the Bull of Heaven to send retribution against Gilgamesh. Something to note is that Anu, Ishtar's father, does not agree with her actions and rather feels sorry for Gilgamesh now being caught in this mess. However, Ishtar threatens to throw a tantrum so intense it would raise the dead, so Anu fearfully agrees, on the condition that Ishtar prepares the 7 years of food that will be needed if the bull dies, as it will cause a massive famine. Thus, Ishtar sicks the bull on the people of Uruk, killing a majority of them. Let me repeat that. Because she was turned down, Ishtar killed most of the people in the city that worshipped her. This is the reverse of the worst she can say is no. We have now entered the worst she can say is yes territory. Seeing the destruction of his city, Gilgamesh and Enkidu leapt into action. Enkidu took the bull by the horns and Gilgamesh slit its throat, killing the great beast. Seeing her vengeance had failed, Ishtar began to cry again. Be it out of annoyance, revenge, or amusement, Enkidu made a grave decision that would alter his life forever. He tore the ass from the Bull of Heaven and hurled it at the head of Ishtar, striking her. She then fled once again, crying as the survivors of the city prepared for a celebration that night for repelling the god. One night, Enkidu has a dream that he is watching a meeting of the gods. They have decided that the pair of heroes must die, for fear that they have become too strong together, having overcome both the monstrous Humbaba and a divine creature in the Bull of Heaven. The sun god pleads a case for both of them, but is outnumbered in the vote. It is decided that Enkidu will be the one cursed to die for his disrespecting of Ishtar. Though the gods may or may not have agreed with her initial actions, the act of insulting her by striking her directly seemed to step too far for most deities. Thus, Enkidu was put before the mere image of Ishtar, Ereshkigal, who deigned that he would die. Enkidu awoke from his dream in a blind rage. The gods had created him and now they had sentenced him to die, a fate that even the most rational-minded person would deem cruel. As such, he cursed the gate that he had dedicated to Enlil, and then approached Shamhat and cursed her for giving him humanity. Soon, though, he regains his composure and considers the good that has come from his gaining of intelligence in life, and begs forgiveness from Shamhat and blesses her instead. Enkidu then falls ill. He calls on Gilgamesh and recounts what he saw in his dream, and as he grows weaker and acknowledges that death is close, asks Gilgamesh not to forget him. Thus, after 12 days of painful illness, Enkidu dies. He was given full royal rights for his funeral, and Gilgamesh himself made a great offering so that he may live peacefully in the underworld. Thus ends the life of Enkidu. So influential was he on Gilgamesh that he is mentioned by name in the king's dying words, joyous at the fact that he will get to see his best friend once again. This is where these episodes usually end. But what if I told you that there's a second version of Enkidu that wasn't a construct of the divine, rather a slave that gained the favor of the king and rose through the ranks through his own actions? This version of Enkidu comes to us in the form of several poems. In the first, Enkidu is merely mentioned as a slave preparing weapons for King Gilgamesh. In the second, Gilgamesh becomes terrified of death and wishes to make himself immortal through his actions and sets off to the Cedar forest with his men in tow, Enkidu among them. Enkidu warns Gilgamesh of the dangers, and while Gilgamesh acknowledges them, chooses to begin cutting the trees instead. Humbaba then comes to deal with the interlopers, but is instead tricked by them. For all of his might, Humbaba was a simple-minded creature, and so was bribed with various gifts to let go of his 7 auras. After he had removed them, he was captured and beaten by the group and eventually began begging for mercy. Much like in the above story, Gilgamesh thinks to spare Humbaba, but in this one, Enkidu is much more direct, decapitating the Beastman himself. This draws the attention of one of the chief gods, Enlil, who reprimands the men for the death of one of his guardians. Enlil then takes the auras and distributes them to various places that men would ever after fear, such as forests and the mountains. After returning, the goddess Inanna, who is functionally just Ishtar again, is enraged at Gilgamesh for administering justice in her temple and sends the Bull of Heaven to kill him. But its insatiable hunger causes it to destroy the crops of Uruk and divert the flows of rivers, leading to a famine. Enkidu again appears in a similar role as before, holding down the bull while Gilgamesh kills it. After this, the pair distribute the meat of the Bull of Heaven to the poor and offer its horns at the temple of Inanna. For a time, there appears to be peace, but Inanna once again stirs up trouble, this time however not of her own volition. She had taken a great oak that had been blown away from the river and replanted it in high hopes of making it into a throne for herself. However, as the tree grew, a fearsome serpent took up residence in its roots, a monstrous eagle in its branches, and a demoness in its trunk. Unable to remove them on her own, Inanna sought the help of the sun god, but he too was unable to remove them. Thus, she turned to Gilgamesh, who accepted the divine commission. While this may seem weird given that she was trying to kill him not one chapter earlier, Gilgamesh, despite it all, was still the ruler of Uruk, a city that worshipped Inanna. Thus, he killed the serpent, drove the eagle to the mountains, and the demoness away to the desert, and as a reward was given a sacred drum and drumstick by Inanna. As he was returning, these sacred items slipped his grasp and somehow fell all the way down into the underworld. I'm not joking, that is the hard cut in the document I'm using. He's got them and then they are in hell. Rad. Gilgamesh sends Enkidu to the underworld to get the drum and gives him the instructions on how to make the journey safely. However, be it through arrogance or through mistake, Enkidu disregards these warnings and is captured forever held in When he fails to return, Gilgamesh assumes the worst and calls upon the gods to ask them that they return his friend. However, the gods are unwilling, or possibly unable, to answer these pleas, but conjure a ghost of Enkidu to speak with Gilgamesh. He tells him of what happened in his fate, and Gilgamesh during this time refers to Enkidu not by name but as my friend. After this, the text is lost. The only continuation that we currently know about is that on his deathbed, Gilgamesh takes comfort in knowing that he will see his old comrades again, and that he will be reunited with his best friend Enkidu. That is where the story of Enkidu actually ends. The pairing of these two is a friendship archetype that transcends time. Making this not too long after the Theseus video makes me see a resemblance between Enkidu and Pirithous, inseparable friends who ventured into the underworld, only for one to be taken forever from the other due to hubris. Enkidu in both versions matched both might and mind of Gilgamesh somewhat as a reflection of himself. Gilgamesh begins as a man who acts like a dangerous beast, only to be challenged by Enkidu, a dangerous beast who acts like a man. At some point, Gilgamesh begins to act more humane, while Enkidu is unable to ever fully overcome his primal nature, hence his consistent ruthlessness. But despite this, the two were forever the closest of friends. And that's that. Enkidu in the books. Thank you all so much for watching. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my patrons for choosing Enkidu for this month's video and for their continued support. You can vote on next month's Behind These Servants video over on Patreon with the $3 tier. If you enjoyed, please consider subbing. Check out my links for my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, and podcast. But for now guys, keep your chin up. Peace.